Awesome. Before I start, I just wanted to say thank you all so much for taking the time to be here. I know there's a whole bunch of cool stuff going on outside, and to everyone involved in making Hackaloo happen, thank you so much for the opportunity. So let's get started. About me, just really quick, offensive security engineer. I started as a security operations center analyst. Bachelor's degree in computer systems. I've done a couple presentations before in the past, besides Cambridge, besides Dallas, Security Fest, Brook Only Hack. And if any of you guys happen to be at Black Alps in a few weeks from now, definitely stop by and say hi. I'll be there. Then goes the boring alphabet soup, yada yada. Fun fact about me. My favorite video game is Zombies Ate My Neighbors. So if y'all ever have the chance to play it, definitely check it out. It's a little bit of an old one, but it's a goodie. Okay, so what are we doing here? We're going to talk about the messy aftermath of what happens when it comes to post-compromise activity. Whenever an attacker breaks into a server, it's not like they just go like, whoa, I'm in. So what do they actually do? What kind of little traces or little breadcrumbs do they leave that we can actually look for and give us some hint of the activity that they performed? All right, so I'm going to be complaining and whining for a little bit about beauty brands. Why are they even a target? I actually had a VP a while ago asking me, why are you focused on beauty brands? Like, why would hackers look at them? Why wouldn't they? They handle like a big amount of information, and they're usually like a target when it comes to influencers. Like, okay, click on my discount code and you'll get 20% off of this foundation, or click on my whatever and you'll get a discount. Right? So, not trying to offend anybody, but they're usually looking at young and impressionable audiences that are really not familiar, are really not the best when it comes to security practices. Weak back-end security behind pretty-looking, appealing front ends. Because, as long as the website is looking pretty, who cares if it's secured or not? Brand reputation pressure leads to ransom payouts. A lot of people just rather pay the ransom than invest the time and money on good security controls. It's not just data that they're targeting. Let's just take, for example, Victoria's Secret. They've been compromised 4 times within the last 5 years. And the last time that they got compromised was this year during Memorial Weekend. So basically, what makes it even more interesting about this retailer in particular is the customers basically are given the opportunity to post their pictures of whatever they're buying and getting a certain amount of points. Used to be 100 points. I think they just boosted it to 500. But what happens when the attacker compromises a website like this one or a server from them? It's not just credit card information. It's also PII, right? And let's not forget that this is a lingerie retailer and people are getting points for posting their pictures. So now the attacker has your pictures, your email address, your passwords, your credit card information. So that's a recipe for disaster. All right. So we're going to talk about what kind of logs do we need to detect that intrusion. This is by no means a comprehensive guide, but we're going to talk about like the bigger picture. Network logs, for example. Perimeter device, DNS, net flows, routers, and switches. And even not looking just specifically from the security standpoint, these are the type of logs that are going to tell us the health of a device. For example, Cisco devices, if there has been a new local user added into the device. Or application logs. If it's a web application, a database, or a container, if there's been any modifications, if there's been any data that has been exported, or data that has been deleted, or if the application is still accessible or not. Endpoint logs. So whenever you're investigating an incident, the very first thing that I used to look at back when I was doing investigations, now I'm more on the offensive side, was our XDR logs or our EDR logs. Because they're really... All right, so there's like this option that is called for failures. And this is definitely going to be a story, so yeah. Alrighty, so we were talking about endpoint logs. Back in the day, whenever I was in the Security Operations Center and I was just doing more SOC work, my very first thing to do whenever I was investigating at incidents was look at my EDR or XDR logs. So, endpoint threat and detections, if there were any malicious files placed, help me build a timeline, potential IOCs, or activity that was associated with malicious IPs. File integrity, if there were any sensitive files that were affected, and the beauty of XDRs is that they let you customize or create your own rules that alert you whenever a sensitive file is being modified. For threat intel feeds, a lot of people just work with third-party vendors to provide them threat intel feeds, malicious hashes, suspicious domains, or IP addresses associated with malicious activity. So who watches the watcher? This is in the event that your XDR goes belly up. What alternatives do you actually have? Let's just take CrowdStrike, for instance. They have a real-time response console. It's not the most sophisticated thing in the world, but it gets the job done, right? So whenever an attacker accesses or has access to this type of console, they can not only completely just stop the sensor, but they can actually isolate the host, pull it out of the network, or they could actually create their own customized binary. And nothing tells me that once the sensor is stopped, this host is just contained or unable to communicate with other hosts, that they're not able to place a customized binary and turn it into a command and control server. So what can we actually do once we don't have an XDR? That's kind of a problem, but what alternatives do we have? A lot of people have their XDR logs forwarded into their SIEM to the point where, okay, I have an alert from my XDR. I'm also going to be able to visualize this on my SIEM, right? Or syslogs. Or it's going to help us visualize at what point in time did we actually stopped getting XDR logs. Network detection and response technologies. So this is for us to detect any lateral movement or traffic that we're not familiar with, or things that actually just fall out of our pattern. Deception technologies. This one in its own is really going to be no use, especially if a lot of people just make the mistake of throwing the kitchen sink on their honeypots and really not giving a realistic approach. Another thing is not trying to look at any actual benefit of the telemetry that you could be generating. So if you just have your honeypot in there and really not looking or analyzing the activities from an attacker, that's something else to keep in mind. Alternative telemetry. Tools like Velociraptor, just like Stefan was mentioning previously. This is a really good tool when it comes to forensic investigation. And you get to choose which particular hunts or which particular file locations you want to be looking at. In this incident that I worked with, I was looking at this folder in particular, user local. And the beauty of that particular folder is the fact that it often stores customized scripts by system administrators. So it's easy for it to blend in with just regular and normal activity in the event that an attacker wanted to place a malicious file in there. So, setting up the stage. Now we're going to talk about how the incident that we're going to, or that I investigated back then, actually happened. So, it happened to a small beauty retailer. So, this type of beauty retailer allowed customers to set up appointments online. However, the application suffered from a whole bunch of broken access controls. And just closer to the end, we're going to talk about everything that went awfully wrong. I remember when I was investigating this, I was just like, This is not an incident. This is a cry for help. So, authenticated users could manipulate parameters to access administrator level and upload functionalities that they were really not supposed to have to begin with. And then by exploiting this flow, attackers uploaded a malicious file to the server, and that's how they gain initial access. Just for us to get an idea, those are the IP addresses that we're going to be using. So the attack kill chain, initial recon, then they gain valid credentials, and then they were able to exploit broken access control. They uploaded a malicious payload, and then they gained remote shell access. This happened back in 2023, and I was doing some digging, and apparently even back then, that was the most common action after gaining unauthorized access. Back in 2023, so it wasn't even that long ago, and this is a problem that's still happening. So, while the customer was initially registering to set up an appointment, they were able to make a purchase, update personal information, and this happened because the beauty retailer relied on a shared customer account system. The same account that you used to set up your appointments was the one that you used to buy stuff or modify your information, just everything. So, here's the beauty of it. If we know that insecure direct object reference is the type of vulnerability that happens whenever, based on user-supplied input, you're generating an output, the attacker was able to see the logic of the application just by intercepting the request. To me, that's a big red flag. And that's something that's still happening to this day. And I see it a lot when it comes to operational technology and IoT. This is where I see it the most. They modify their role ID to give themselves administrator access, and then they became administrator. Okay, so we're going to talk pretty much about how the incident itself was reported or was visualized within the within our SIM. So in here we can see the attacker booked an appointment, then they accessed their account dashboard, they updated their role ID, and they became administrator. That's when they uploaded the shell. So we're going to ask all the good questions about it. We're going to see everything or the type of files that an attacker would modify or would give us a hint when it comes to post-compromise activity. Users and credentials. We're really not going to go through each one of these individually, but we're going to look at the bigger idea. So this type of files typically store authentication material, usernames, like a hash version of our passwords, authentication keys, and nothing tells me that this is not a key that they could reuse in the future, right? Like, okay, I have a key, I'm going to be able to hop into the network just like looking at additional hosts for this is a valid key. Execution history. So this is a double-edged sword because whenever an attacker logs into a system, they're actually able to visualize what commands they ran. And simultaneously, whenever we're investigating, this is going to give us a good hint or a good idea for us to draw a timeline of how it happened. Lateral movement. So if the attacker modifies, for example, the host file or the resolve.com file, that would pretty much mean that they're able to map an IP address to a host that they could have control over. Malicious implants. So these are locations that are, if you want, ephemeral per se. You can place an implant in there, and a lot of the times this is just going to wipe upon reboot, right? So you place a malicious file, and you typically pair it with either a cron tab or an existing service, or find a way to remain persistent. And these locations don't always get a lot of attention, so that's what makes them good. All right, so we're going to visualize adversarial activity. I'm trying to not use a whole bunch of time because high-risk folders. As I mentioned before, these are really good alternatives because a lot of the times they're word writable. For the bar folder, it typically changes in size or changes in content on a daily basis. In user local, this is typically used by systems administrators to place customized scripts. So what I was mentioning before about the password file, in the incident when it happened, the attacker modified the password file directly just by creating a user to remain persistent and get it to blend in with the rest of the users. So, okay, now I have a user account. I can just remain persistent in the system. Then investigating a little bit further, this was the enumeration that they performed. They were looking at SSH config just to try to see how the SSH service would behave. They're trying to enumerate for a service account. You will see where it says SVC grep. They were trying to see by any chance there was a service account within the password file. Then they were looking at environmental variables. When I was investigating, I was just like, why would you even enumerate that? Well, it turns out that a lot of people like the idea of storing passwords with their environmental variables. So, yeah, that's really a bad start. Event logs. This is another location to investigate. If we see a service that is unusual or that we constantly have it, like starting upon reboot and all of a sudden it stopped, that's something worth investigating. Or repeat failed logins or sudo misuse, like an account that is not a sudoer and it's just trying to sudo, that's typically a bad sign. Suspicious cron activity. Cron tabs being modified. Kernel warnings. If we're getting a whole bunch of errors that we've never really seen before, not a good sign either. Or hunting for a compromised time window. Looking for a timestamp that is getting closer to the time of the compromised. And here we can see, for example, the attacker tried to stop the XDR sensor. So this is why it's important to keep this type of logs and this type of activity visible. We can see that it was actually able to stop. So shell history. Batch history function is designed to cover the first 500 commands. So it's perfect for them to cover their tracks, right? So if we're investigating this and we're seeing like a chunk of it is missing, or for internal reconnaissance, so batch history is going to help us look at internal configurations, right? Perhaps the attacker isn't really looking to delete it or completely wipe it, but seeing, hey, what if these people are actually running? Is there any goodies that I can extract from the batch history that I can reuse later? In here, for example, we can see that the attacker was trying to get it to display. New services. For code execution, system service could be used to execute malicious scripts. Or defense evasion, for example, like, okay, I'm going to create a new service that disables the XDR sensor or that it keeps it in a, lower version that it's vulnerable. Or, okay, I'm going to create a service that completely wipes the logs of this particular location. Or I'm creating this service that is just going to generate a whole bunch of dummy files to make the analysts just waste time and go crazy. How do we actually spot a fake service? Naming convention. If something looks a little bit weird or out of the ordinary, service names. Typically, they make reference to an application that we're familiar with. Or investigating processes. If we're seeing a list of network connections we're not familiar with, or a port that is open and it's really not supposed to be open, that's another thing to investigate. Or monitoring logs, so identifying suspicious activities such as unknown processes, traffic. In here, for example, we can see system updater service. This looks legitimate, but it's not. There isn't such a thing called updater D. Yeah, so they typically just try to make it look legitimate and try to give it a valid name. But it really doesn't match anything realistic. So for geolocation and suspicious IPs, it's important to know what normal looks like in your network. Keep a baseline or a mental baseline, or what kind of activity should you expect. For example, you see Karen from Human Resources logging into her computer at 3 a.m. and transferring a whole bunch of data from Nigeria to any other locations. You know that's not normal. Indicators of data exfiltration or repeated or unsuccessful attempts. Right, so I'm trying to authenticate. I'm here right now in Luxembourg. I'm trying to authenticate from Dallas a whole bunch of times within a very short period of time. That's not a good sign. And here, for example, when I was investigating, and well, obviously these are replicated logs, but I also saw lots of failed logins within a very short period of time and from multiple locations. We got Texas, Mexico, Sweden, Belgium, Poland, all within a very short period of time. And at the end of the day, the attacker ended up exfiltrating some data. It wasn't anything critical, but it was like a big chunk of data. And this is pretty much what the command looked like. Just like curl and the data transfer to a domain that they already had been previously compromised and that they had control over. Download more RAM. People still fall for that. So kernel modules, really trying not to expand. And this is a topic that is a little bit more complex, but it's important to highlight that it's still there and it's still happening. So when it comes to unexpected and unfamiliar modules, hitting or malicious, unstable kernel, we're booting the system and we're starting to see like a whole bunch of crashes or errors. And one thing to keep in consideration is analyzing kernel log, or just like for errors in kernel related messages. This would be an example. This part actually didn't really happen in the incident, but I figure it would be something worth highlighting. RMM abuse. So there aren't a whole bunch of RMM applications that are native to Linux, but there's like versions of it, and organizations work with these tools to manage assets or apply updates and deploy applications. For example, Cockpit, that's a very common one. Or ports that are externally facing and have no actual reason to be available, publicly available. For example, port 9090. I'm really not judging people's options to work. I mean, you do you and whatever makes it easier for you, but just think about this. If you really have no reason to be using a GUI when you can actually be using the command line, there's no real reason to be duplicating a service or having two of the same service. You're just pretty much making it easier for the attackers and making it a little bit tougher for you. And this is another thing, like when I was just being nosy one day, I saw these instances that are publicly running port 9090. And it's just there, out in the open, just for everybody to see. So we're about to wrap up, and we're going to talk about everything that went awfully wrong for this incident to happen. So, just information disclosure, web access firewall, SIM correlation searches, all of those just like completely did not meet the expectations. Gaining valid credentials, weak authentication mechanisms for this type of applications is recommended to implement MFA, right? Or any other mechanism for people to just like have a little bit more secure accounts. Exploiting broken access control, missing authorization checks, predictable object identifiers. So we saw the user accounts had numbers to identify their role, 5, 10, 15, 20. So that was very predictable. Plus, there's no reason for the application to be disclosing and displaying its logic to the users. Like, why? There was no restriction of what got uploaded and what didn't. I mean, the attacker uploaded a payload, but some other person could have uploaded a cat picture, a text file, a PDF, whatever. Gaining remote shell access, no outbound egress filtering. So there was no actual reason or no actual way of limit the communication from one IP address to the other. And post-compromise, there was no lateral movement detection, like this host had access to, this attacker had access to a host. Now they hopped into another one. Now they hopped into this other one. So this might be a little bit of a gray area, but still, like, if you think of all the other checks that they failed to meet, this could have definitely saved a lot of time. And too long didn't read, just long story short. Initial triad, system reconnaissance, you want to look at anything that stores authentication material, network configuration changes, that's really a red flag, logs review. So Stefan was mentioning in his prior talk, if I had one artifact to keep, that would be PowerShell logs. Well, for Linux, it's a little bit trickier because there isn't like a one-to-one equivalent, right? So I would definitely go for my audit logs. Audit D definitely comes in handy. Suspicious artifact. Anything that is placed in a location that is wiped upon reboot or could be paired with a service or the cron tab, definitely could be weaponized. Install binaries or change permissions, network activity to suspicious IP addresses or suspicious domains, and changes in memory or volatility plugins. Those are some things to keep in mind. Final thoughts. We're about done. Audit your logs. Look and know what baseline looks like, what normal looks like in your environment. Automate whenever it's possible, but just don't expect your XDR to take care of everything. Test your security controls. There's no point in implementing a security control if it's not going to be working the way it should be. And then finally, this is something I usually say in my presentations. Security is like skincare for 3 reasons. Number 1, as we age, as we get older, the stuff that we need changes. Number 2, just because something works for your friend doesn't mean it's going to work for you. For another organization doesn't mean it's going to be working for you. Number 3, there isn't a one thing that's going to fix everything. You usually want to take the layered approach. It's the same thing we do with security controls. And that's it.
Thank you very much.